Well, last video ain't doing so hot, so you know what that means. List video! Okay, side note, this was supposed to be a more varied list, but it ended up turning into an Eldari Black Council video, so I guess that's where we are now.
Who's got the power? We got the power! What kind of power? People power! Who's got the power? We got the power!
Hey!
What kind of power?
People power! Hey! This is library.
Hi, I'm Chrono the Harlequin, and this is the channel where I take one step forward and then 2 steps back, but I'm still gaining subs. So, as I said earlier, I just wanted to put this one out there because I have had this list kicking around for quite a while now, and I'm hoping to make it a recurring series on my channel. And if you'd like to see more of this series, make sure to like the video and subscribe if you have not already done so. As it stands, it's the only video I've done that had a part 2 that actually did well. And of course I'm talking about the Lost to the Lore series, where I cover factions and eventually characters that seem to have basically been abandoned by the lore and that people would want back, especially because of how much storytelling potential there is. And first up on the list is the Black Council of the Eldari. Now, you probably know the Black Library if you follow this channel, and if anyone following this channel doesn't know the Black Library, then I am impressed. But all jokes aside, the Black Library of Chaos is an ancient Eldari craft world that contains the sum total of the Eldar race's knowledge regarding chaos and sorcery, and it does contain many books, including but not limited to the Rhana Dandra, that being the book detailing the Eldari end times, the Atlas Infernal, which was a map of the Webway, an ever-shifting map, mind you, made by the Emperor himself, a copy of the Book of Magnus, Magnus the Red's tome of sorcerous knowledge that is incredibly vast, and, allegedly, the Emperor's true name. The Black Library itself is guarded by the Eldari Harlequins, as well as the White Seers, who are Farseers that are dressed in all white specifically for their task and seek out knowledge of chaos to continually add to the library, in order to not just help educate the Eldari race against their enemy, but also to deny it to their enemies. Enemies like Ahriman, who has been seeking the library for a long time now, hoping to harness its power to either undo the Rubricae or God knows what else. It is incredibly well guarded, not just by the Harlequins, but also via psychic barriers and through its own machinations because it does have its own mind, quote-unquote. However, there are some people who can come and go as they please, namely those who have, quote, mastered the chaos within themselves and are therefore uncorruptible, such as Eldar Solitaires and the human Illuminati. Remember when we had the Illuminati as a plot point? Those were some days. Now, anyway, the whole thing about the Black Library is that it did used to be a pretty big plot point, and as a consequence, the Black Council was also one. But a lot of that was sequestered back within that period of, like around the early 2010s, usually like around 6th edition, because the lore was just a lot different then. I mean, a lot of the same lore plot points and concepts were solidified, it wasn't like Rogue Trader, but the vibe was much different, and it felt like writers were prone to going after more ambitious and eccentric stories. One example being the book Atlas Infernal, where an inquisitor named Bronislaw Savak steals the Atlas Infernal, the map of the Webway made by the Emperor, after escaping from his forced confinement within the library itself because he was deemed too dangerous to stay alive by the aforementioned Black Council. And this Black Council is comprised of a lot of characters. Namely, it is high-ranking Eldari Farseers and warriors who sort of serve as the de facto leaders of the Eldari race. They've really fallen off in terms of lore, but back in the day, they were known as the closest thing the Eldar had to unified leadership, because they were all dedicated to the one goal all Eldari can agree on: the defeat, or at least limiting, of chaos. The most notable member of the Black Council being Eldrad Ulthran himself. He is the one who makes the call to imprison Bronislaw Savak in the Black Library because Ahriman had access to his mind. And a fun thing about the Black Council, Ahriman was effectively their nemesis. Not just Magnus, him personally, because he was such a menace to these people and was so relentless in his pursuit of the library. Like, that's not just a TTS meme, he literally got within sight of the thing before being turned back by the Harlequins in a fierce battle. Ahriman has actually really fallen off as a character. Like, back in the day, he used to be this big thing that everybody would freak out about and get so into, but nowadays he's only really known for being sort of like a fandom favorite and for all the Vesemira art of him. People really like the character, but he's just been shelved by GW and I hope they get back to him. Like, I have lists of characters we want brought back to the setting, and he is absolutely on it. Now, the reason I went overboard explaining everything about the Black Library instead of the Black Council is because the two are intrinsically linked. You need to understand just how important the Black Library at least was to the lore back in the 2010s before you get into understanding how important the Black Council is and how much they could do as a plot point, especially in regards to unifying the Eldari race into an actually effective force, which they have not been in the lore for quite some time. They just kind of mess around and each craft world is doing their own thing, but the Black Council would absolutely have the clout within the race to say, alright everybody, heads out of asses, let's get our act together, and effectively lead them in battle or in operation against some enemy. And I think because the Ynnari books were such a flop, GW might be scared of tackling an Eldari storyline, but I think one where the Eldari, led by the Black Council, going up against Ahriman and the Thousand Sons would be awesome, and people would love that. Attaching his name to this Black Council would absolutely bring people on just to see more of Ahriman. And it would help give both factions that have kind of fallen off a much-needed boost in popularity. And God knows I will take any excuse if it gets us more Harlequin units, because Jesus Christ, I think they have the least unit variety out of any army in all of 40k. Like, way back in the day, they actually did used to have Wraith constructs that looked really goofy, and perhaps they could get more vehicles that fit with that fast attack fleet of foot theme, possibly like proper planes as opposed to just different kinds of jet bikes. Or maybe you could even have a White Seer as a possible command unit. That could be really cool. And next, since I mentioned them, this one may not be that great to introduce back into the lore, but it definitely is a concept, and I completely understand why this plotline was effectively the poster child for retconned lore. That being the Illuminati in Warhammer, and more specifically, Starchild, because those were intrinsically connected. Now, the Illuminati were a special group of people known as Illuminatus, who were those individuals, usually Inquisitors, who had been possessed by a demon but were able to expel it from their body, thereby making them immune to chaos. And I should note now that this group only existed in 3 books, all part of one series. And that series did not make it out of the 90s. Many of you would know them as the Inquisition War books, written by Ian Watson. And they are actually the first 40k novels ever written, namely featuring the Inquisitor Jack Dracos. However, despite the fact that this is the first plotline in all of Warhammer, there is basically no mention of it in the modern setting, because the Illuminati were a group who sought to gather up the children that the Emperor had throughout his entire life, known as the Sinsei, who were basically immortal heroes, and tell them, oh, you're the Knights of the Long Watch, we're gonna assemble a special team. However, the real plan was to sacrifice them all at once, hoping that when they died, their essence would fuse with the Star Child, that being the empathy of the Emperor's soul that was forced out of his body when he killed Horus, and it would all combine and revive the Emperor. And the Eldari were actually totally on board with this theory, and were really buddy-buddy with the Illuminati, because they thought that even though their time in the galaxy was over, they could still retain a position of authority by being close with the people who were about to seize control of the Imperium. Especially the Harlequins, who believed that Star Emperor, or whatever it's called, would be under the control of Kegarok, because I guess even they could see how much clownery this was from a mile away. And the allies did include Eldrad Ulthran and therefore the Black Council, because they had the best interests of the Eldari at heart. And this also does liken back to the time in the lore when the Eldari had more consistent connections within the Inquisition, and there was more open cooperation. Nowadays in campaign books, you'll hear about Eldar reaching out to specific Inquisitors and giving them advice. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but that's about it. However, it's only in very certain books that you hear about the two cooperating in any meaningful capacity. A good example being Gideon Ravener from Dan Abnett's Inquisition books. And even then, those are only just small lines of dialogue that help set up larger plot points and don't really have large-scale implications. Another aspect of the Black Library that gets often overlooked but is very well known to the fandom is the Book of the Rhana Dandra and the subsequent Rhana Dandra itself. You see, the Book of the Rhana Dandra is in the very depths of the Black Library and bound with chains of light, chains that have since come undone with the opening of the Great Rift across the galaxy. In it is the prophecies of the Rhana Dandra, that being the final battle of the Eldar, where all the souls in the Infinity Circuits across the craft worlds would awaken Ynnari and lead to the death of Slaanesh, and the eventual freeing of the Eldari race, as well as the merger of the Materium and Immaterium, as well as the fact that none of this is ever gonna fucking happen. Ever wonder why they don't do anything with the Eldar lore-wise? This shit is why. Because it keeps turning into grandiose, over-the-top shit like this that can never really go anywhere, or else it will basically end the setting. I'm sorry, but I hate to say it, the Eldar are poorly written, at best. Now, the thing about the Book of the Rhana Dandra is, since everything else is basically garbage, you can pick it up from scratch, it's a really good plot device, or at least a MacGuffin, because it states that the prophecies within, it's not just the prophecy of the Rhana Dandra, but many others, some of which aren't even related to the Eldar, and which shift and change themselves and adjust themselves as events change and unfold. Meaning, it's not a set-in-stone thing, you can just read it and know what'll happen. Things will alter themselves, but it is still very useful. Also, it should be noted that the Book of the Rhana Dandra outlines what will happen to each of the individual Phoenix Lords. You know, kind of like the Scandinavian mythology surrounding Ragnarok, where you know what gods will die and how. Like, the book states what roles the Phoenix Lords will play, and it's been noted that they have been seen more and more in the setting as times have all come to a head. So this is the big thing with the Black Council and the Black Library. You have the Black Library as this highly sought-after, important location that many factions want to converge on and have had dealings with. You have the Black Council, a unifying ruling body led by named characters such as Eldrad Ulthran, who are in charge of it and can direct the Eldari race. You have antagonists such as Ahriman and the Thousand Suns, as well as the general forces of chaos, like possibly even demons like Kairos Fateweaver, who would want to get involved and get at the knowledge in there. You have Imperials thrown into the mix, because Inquisitors have even entered the Black Library on 2 separate occasions lore-wise. And generally speaking, there are Inquisitors who have dealings with the Eldari, and some who are diametrically opposed and will never trust them and view dealing with them as inherent heresy. So there's that angle to go with. There's the Grey Knights, who have their extensive knowledge of chaos and have worked with the Eldar in the past, and I even have one of my earliest videos about Grey Knight and Eldar cooperation. There's also the fact that you have the Phoenix Lords possibly coming in as big reveals, or sort of, you know, Deus Ex Machinas who could help turn the tide at the worst of times, and these books could start setting up their returns. There's also the issue of the Ynnari. This could be the chance to either bring them back into the lore proper, maybe with a new objective or a renewed vitality, or finally wipe them out. Have Eldrad say, look, this was a failed experiment, it didn't work, and maybe do something with Yvraine and the Vizark. Listen, either pick their story back up, or just send them off altogether. One or the other. And it should be noted that this level of power shifting would attract the attention of a character that many people love but have not heard from in a long time. I do say that a lot. That being Asdrubael Vect, the Dark Lord of Camorra. Now, one thing that must be noted with him is that his control over Camorra is now uncontested, but still shaky, because there are pro-Ynnari riots and uprisings now and again in the city. And there's also the fact that the Drukhari have the Dark Muses, which are their own set of minor dark deities, and Asdrubael Vect declared himself a living muse, basically a living god. So the Black Council coming in and being reintroduced into the lore could see his reintroduction as well, basically either allying himself tenuously with the Black Council for a greater goal, or standing against them and saying, no, I am a living god and I will not have you undermine my position. I'm gonna make a play at control of the entire race and you won't stop me. Turning this well-known but ignored character into a large-scale antagonist. This video has been really all over the place, guys. I'm sorry, but as I stated earlier, this was initially gonna be a list of various factions to bring back to the lore or that have just been forgotten, and it morphed into whatever this is, basically a video about the Eldari Black Council. I think I'm gonna title it Lost to the Lore, Eldar Black Council. You know, it's sort of like a special episode, you could say. Because I just started and the ideas just sort of kept coming and coming. But what do you guys think? Do you guys believe that the Black Council does have narrative potential and could help bring the Eldari back in force to the lore and basically mop up their storylines and give them something new? Or do you think maybe it would just be a distraction from all the big stuff going on, especially with some of the newer books like Genefather, which I hear is really good, but I probably won't be picking up because I haven't read a lot of the prior books. Do you guys believe that maybe the entire concept is outmoded and should just be left to lie as 40K moves in a new direction? I would love to hear what you guys have to say in the comments below, and I'm sorry I haven't been responding to comments as much as I used to because I've just been really busy these days with university, but I will try to get back to more of these ones. And until then, I will see you in the next video.